Welcome to the chosen ones. Every secret ultimately spills. However, when it comes to your identity, the game shifts away from exposing. It is about power. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the FBI isn't only monitoring you. They've made a strategic announcement to you, much like a headline. They couldn't resist, not in whispers or shadows, but in plain sunshine, emblazoned with a checkmate on their board. Suspenseful? Absolutely. But here's what makes it even weirder. More than half of all government leaks are not accidental. They are deliberate plays. This implies that if your name fell through the gaps, it was not due to carelessness. It was choreography. This is much more than simply taking away people's privacy. It's about being labeled a piece in a high-stakes game in which every move is deliberate. And let us be completely honest. Most individuals will spend their whole lives unseen, invisible, and unrecorded. Yet here you are, now a strategic abnormality, significant enough to be leaked, followed, and tagged as if you were the twist conclusion to a secretly running movie. And here is when the sense of humor comes in. You thought you were simply going about your day, checking your phone bill, or wondering why your Wi-Fi was so sluggish. Meanwhile, someone in a government agency was rearranging your name like a rook on a chessboard. Talk about multitasking. You were busy surviving Mondays, while they were busy transforming you into classified entertainment. So let's look at why the FBI's alleged expose wasn't merely a leak. It was a proclamation, a strategic move, and ultimately an unintentional spotlight on a reality they did not want the public to know. And believe me, at the end of this, you'll see the checkmate was not yours to dread. It was theirs to confess. Number 1, exposure became evidence. You were constantly being hunted. Exposure became the evidence. You were constantly being hunted. For years, many around you may have felt you were exaggerating when you mentioned being monitored, undercut, or singled out. They chuckled at the concept that forces outside your personal circle may be keeping an eye on you. However, when your name was revealed and linked to an FBI-level interest, things changed. The claims of paranoia ceased to be credible. The so-called conspiracy was not in your imagination. It had been on paper, in files, and is now out in the open. The exact thing they attempted to keep secret became clear proof. This kind of exposure functions as a truth stamp. If you weren't significant, your name wouldn't have been recorded, traced, and released in the first place. It demonstrates that you were never a typical target of gossip or neighborhood jealousy. You were a part of something greater, and it took tactics, cover-ups, and planned actions to keep you contained. Being chased was more than simply a sense. It was validated by the very institutions who believed they had control over the story. What makes this disclosure painful for those who questioned you is that the exposure did not kill you. It vindicated you. The leak may have disclosed your identity, but it also exposed their infatuation. It informed the world that you were never insane for sense eyes on you. It's never incorrect to suspect that something more was going on. When the FBI leaves a trail, even if it is in the form of a so-called leak, it admits that you were a topic of interest long before anybody else thought it. This kind of exposure has both advantages and disadvantages. On their side, it demonstrates despair. They had to bring you out into the open since managing you from the shadows wasn't enough on your end. It confirmed strength. You survived the search without recognizing how many pieces were already put against you. That is the irony. They spent years maneuvering while you remained unconscious that you were important to a board game you had never wanted to participate. Rather than discrediting you, the leak revealed the reality that they had attempted to conceal. You were not imagining the strain. You were being studied, tested, and monitored. And now that the proof is in the open, nobody can change the fact that you were constantly pursued since exposure became irrefutable evidence. Number 2, the leak was not accidental. It was a move on the board. The release was not accidental. It was a board decision at the level where the FBI functions. Nothing comes out unintentionally. Files do not just drift into the public domain by accident. It wasn't carelessness that led to the disclosure of your identity. It was choreography, an intentional play designed to test emotions, alter energy, and convey a message. Leaks are often utilized as tools, not accidents. They are strategic weapons, not random flaws. And in this situation, The leak wasn't intended to expose you. It was about seeing how the exposure would turn out. This is what most people overlook when strong systems move. They are already many steps ahead. They do not just drop a name for the purpose of drama. They drop it to investigate the ripple effects. How will others around you respond? How will you respond? Who is going to panic? Who will scatter? Who will agree with you? Who will betray you? That is what a leak measures. It's less about the information itself than the chain reaction it causes. And in that regard, your expose was not awkward. It was a planned test of influence. By declaring it a move on the board, it emphasizes the fact that you have always been playing chess, whether you were aware of it or not. Ordinary folks do not participate in these sports. They exist outside of tactics that are undetectable to bigger systems. However, the fact that your identify was purposely released indicated that you are not average. You are a piece worth moving. More than that, you're a piece that must be handled with caution, since the incorrect move against you may deal considerably more damage than they planned. The fact that your identity was released as part of a planned leak indicates a deeper reality. They couldn't keep you concealed forever. Containment was not operating. Silence was not working. So they changed tactics. In chess, a player does not disclose a piece for no reason. It's always related to the long game. That is precisely what the leak reflects. They played their cards not because they wanted to, but because the pressure of your presence compelled them. So, when your identity is revealed, don't mistake it for an error. It was the clearest indicator yet that you'd been on the board all along, and they just accepted it by making an irreversible move. Number 3, your existence became a classified issue. Your presence has become a classified issue. Most individuals live their lives without ever grabbing the attention of a system greater than their immediate surroundings. Their names never appear on files. Their acts never result in alarms. Their decisions have no ramifications outside their own surroundings. However, when your identify was revealed and linked to government interest, it indicated something different. You weren't just living. You were causing a disruption. You weren't just surviving. You were sending off alarms that classified you as oddities, outliers, and unpredictable forces. To be designated a classified issue indicates that your mere existence caused problems. Systems thrive on predictability. They are based on patterns, statistics, and probability. Ordinary folks are simple to measure and predict. But then someone similar to you arrives. Someone whose actions do not fit the formulae, whose resistance does not meet the predictions, and whose survival defies the chances. And now you're not a case study. You pose a danger to the structure. Your life ceases to be private and becomes an uncontrolled variable. That's how your information wound up in files and systems you never signed up for. This change also explains why exposure became required. A classified issue cannot stay hidden indefinitely, since the system must respond, and action requires acknowledgement in order to leak your identity. It wasn't simply a game when I tagged you as a strategic checkmate. It was an acknowledgement that they'd been attempting to control a reality that was too big to ignore. They couldn't box you in privately anymore, so they made it public, hoping it would limit your power. Ironically, it just reinforced it. Becoming a categorized issue bears consequences beyond the personal. It demonstrates that your tale has an influence beyond your own life, that your decisions affect realms you can't always observe. If you were inconsequential, they would have let you live peacefully. The fact that you weren't granted that privilege demonstrates how your presence destabilized what they felt was unassailable. Instead of silently eliminating you, they chose to showcase you and include your name in a story. They intended to control, but were eventually exposed. That is the contradiction that marks you as a classified issue. They lifted you. They transformed your life into proof of something exceptional. And now, the reality is obvious. Your presence was not simply observed. It was investigated, confined, and eventually spilled because you were never ordinary enough to overlook. Number 4, what they described as a leak was really an admission. They called it a leak, but it was essentially an admission. When such strong mechanisms fail to protect information, it is seldom an error. They conceal it as a breach, a mistake, or an oversight. However, it is often an indirect method of admitting something they are unable to state directly by allowing your identify to sneak through. They verified what they had been denying all along. You are more important than they ever wanted to accept. If you were genuinely unimportant, your name would not have made it into their files, much alone their headlines. Governments do not squander time or resources on unimportant issues. That is why the alleged leak is stacked on the surface. It seems to be exposure, but it's really an involuntary confession. When your name appeared in their story, they verified your effect. They effectively marked your life with recognition, even if they attempted to frame it adversely. That is the irony. In their effort to control the narrative, they ended up confirming your role in it. The power in this kind of admittance is not in the facts they provide. Data includes statistics, facts, and documentation. Why is this significant? And is there a subtext? The subtext indicates that you were never invisible. The subtext is that they monitored, researched, and followed you because you were already altering the world around you. The subtext is that you were always on board, even when they attempted to persuade you that you were insignificant. This is where many people overlooked the greater reality. A leak disguised as a weapon might backfire when people learn it is evidence of significance. By attempting to reduce you to files and exposure, they unintentionally informed the world that you were significant enough to earn their attention in the first place. The leak becomes less about you and more about them, exposing their infatuation, fear, and inability to manage what you represent. That is why the leak has more weight than it seems. It is not simply about revealing your identity. It's about their tacit admission that your influence was too strong to ignore. And once such an admission is made, it is impossible to retract. They believed they were weakening you, but in reality, they made you unmistakable. Number 5. The FBI did not just unmask you. They verified you. The FBI did not just unmask you. They verified you. An identity breach of this size is more than simply being disclosed to the public. It's about being validated in ways that no critic, skeptic, or hater can erase. People may have spent years questioning your claims, ignoring your voice, or laughing at your concerns. They may have believed you were exaggerated, paranoid, or making things up. However, if your name appears in government files and is part of a leak, the discourse changes dramatically. Suddenly, what you mentioned about being watched, examined, or targeted is no longer just supposition. It is recorded. This is the distinction between exposure and validation. Exposure is about visibility and being noticed. Validation refers to being acknowledged as a legitimate official, undeniable. By revealing your identity, the system unintentionally provided you with proof that no one can challenge. Most individuals never acquire that level of evidence. It indicates that you weren't simply a voice in the wilderness. You were a name on a file that they deemed significant enough to transfer, track, and ultimately leak. That confirmation cuts through the confusion of uncertainty like nothing else could. Family members ignored your warnings, classmates insulted your senses, and even foes believed you were helpless. All of them are confronted with the fact that you were correct. The leak itself becomes a sign of validity. It doesn't matter whether others believe you anymore. The proof stands on its own, and this is what makes it even more potent. Friends and allies did not give you the affirmation. It comes from the same powers that attempted to confine you. They were the ones who recorded your existence, followed your travels, and produced files under your name. In other words, those who attempted to discredit you ultimately confirmed you. That is not simply irony. It is poetic justice. So, although the term unmasking implies that they took something from you, the fact is significantly sharper. They did not reveal a flaw. They revealed the extent of your influence. They put their stamp of approval on your life, whether they meant it or not. The leak became proof that you were never invisible, insignificant, or ordinary. You were authentic enough to be recorded, important enough to be leaked, but irrefutable enough to be validated. Number 6 is strategic checkmate, which implies they cannot defeat you head-on. Strategic checkmate implies they can't defeat you head-on. In chess, a checkmate does not occur by chance. It is the ultimate step in a lengthy series of methods for cornering an opponent when direct strikes fail. That is why the FBI calls your vulnerability a checkmate. Very revealing. It wasn't a victory dance. It was an admission. It was their way of admitting that their direct confrontation with you failed. They couldn't quiet you with intimidation. They could not erase you via obscurity. And they couldn't beat you with their normal tools. So they turned to exposure and manipulation, thinking that the indirect technique would accomplish what their direct efforts could not. That informs you something about the danger level you posed. You weren't simply another individual ensnared in their web. You were a variable that they could not compute. Someone whose presence caused them to change their whole approach. It is one thing to win a game by overwhelming your opponent. It's totally another to concede, even implicitly, that the only way to play against you is to change the rules. That is what this so-called checkmate was, a rewrite of the board since the ordinary game did not work against you. And here's the irony of declaring checkmate. They showed their hand at chess. When you're actually in command, you don't flaunt your power. You let the board to speak for itself. However, when someone noisily announces victory, it is generally to hide how close they were to defeat. That is the energy driving your exposure. It was hardly the peaceful assurance of triumph. It was the audible despair of a system that had run out of alternatives. The greater fact is that their change to exposing demonstrates your resiliency. They would have killed you if they had the chance. If they could have crushed you silently, they would have. The fact that they had to make you public indicates that you outperformed their initial line of defense. It indicates your presence defied erasure in ways they did not expect. So they dubbed it a strategic checkmate. Understand what they were really saying. We couldn't defeat you in the game we devised, so we modified it entirely. And if they had to change the rules specifically to cope with you, you were never the one held accountable. You caused the board to shake in the first place. Number 7. Your privacy was never the intended aim. Your impact was. Your privacy was never the intended aim. Your impact was. That is the most overlooked aspect of an identity breach at this level. The idea was never to merely put your name out there, since a name alone means very little. What they feared was what would happen if that name became associated with your narrative, your truth, and your capacity to influence others. Privacy is just the surface-level excuse that impacts the actual battlefield. Think about it. If you were unimportant, there would be no use in exposing you. Nobody wastes energy attempting to diminish someone who has no influence. The fact that they risked a leak demonstrates that your voice had value that they couldn't afford to ignore. The underlying concern was not that others would recognize you. People would begin to pay attention to what you represented. And this difference is everything. The leak itself was a means of control. They think that by exposing you, they would decrease your authority, raise doubts about your reliability, and portray you as lesser than you are. They wanted to eliminate the mystery to make you simpler to box in. But they made a mistake. They acknowledged you had enough power to warrant neutralization. That admission speaks louder than any material they released to the public. The irony here is that they are attempting to limit your reach. They inadvertently increased it. They verified to everyone watching that you were someone with a voice powerful enough to disrupt systems. People who previously doubted you had to reconsider. Because why would such strong entities care for someone they thought was insignificant in an attempt to diminish your impact? They provided evidence of magnitude. Your impact was the true aim since it cannot be filed, edited, or confined in papers. Influence is conveyed via discussions, connections, energy, and adjustments in viewpoint. It cannot be tracked down by exposure. It only increases when people understand how far those in power will go to stifle it. So, although they expected revealing your identity to limit your reach, it accomplished the reverse. It verified that your impact is not only genuine, but strong enough to shake the walls they previously believed were impenetrable. And it is the part they will never undo. The 8th exposure transformed you into a mirror they couldn't control. You become a reflection of yourself as a result of exposure. They lacked control. When your identity was compromised, it was more than simply disclosing your name. It was about pushing the world to face information that had been carefully concealed. People now saw more than just you. They saw the machines behind you. They saw the monitoring, manipulation, and silent hands tugging strings. What they planned to do to isolate and undermine you ended up reflecting themselves, their systems, and their corruption. That is the risk of exposure. They never calculated. A mirror does not generate an image. It exposes one. By placing you in the limelight, they accidentally exposed their own shadows. Instead of saying, "Look what was revealed about you," the larger issue became, why were they watching you in the first place? That was a question they didn't want to ask since it would bring the focus back to them. The leak revealed more about their preoccupation, methods, and fears than it did about you. The fact is that they couldn't control what people saw. When they elevated the mirror, they wanted you to seem weak. But instead, they seemed desperate. They sought to undermine your credibility. But instead, they emphasized their own overreach. The expose highlighted their strategies rather than your faults. And once people see beyond the veil, they cannot unsee it. That's why the release backfired so severely. It caused the hidden to be seen. The irony is that you had never requested to be that mirror. You did not attempt to reflect back the corruption. But once the light shone on you, it was unavoidable. Your life became evidence. Your tale became the lens, and your exposure served as a window. People glanced through to discover something they weren't allowed to know. This is why you got unmanageable. A mirror does not respond to the person who stares into it. It merely displays what is there. So, in their attempt to eliminate you, they exposed themselves and sought to undermine your power. They emphasized the system's weaknesses and believed they controlled the narrative. They lost it. People knew your disclosure was not a personal epiphany. It was their reflection. And no system, no matter how strong, can ever completely control what a mirror displays once it is put in front of the public. Number 9. The leak was an effort to crack the unreachable. The leak was an effort to break through the inaccessible. They started with the customary routes. The subtle intimidation, the silent surveillance, and the unseen pressures are all designed to wear you down without leaving any proof. But nothing worked. You stood firm in the face of their observation. You did not fall under scrutiny. You did not sacrifice yourself in the manner that they anticipated. That tenacity is what drove them to the final option: exposure. If they couldn't get to you in quiet, they'd attempt to shake you in public. Exposing your identity wasn't simply for control. It was about desperation. It was the step you made after all other options had failed. They believed that bringing you into the spotlight, taking away your privacy, and making you into a headline would destabilize you in some manner. Quiet pressure never could. It was supposed to corner you and undermine your confidence, which had made you unbeatable in the first place. They didn't expect you to be able to stand even in the face of exposure. What they feared would be your breaking point became evidence of your perseverance. The phrase unreachable explains all about why they did this. Most individuals can be persuaded, bullied, or coerced into silence. However, when someone cannot be persuaded by fear, bribery, or pressure, they become a distinct kind of challenge, one requiring exceptional measures. That is why they leaked. They couldn't move you personally, so they attempted to smash you publicly. They hoped that exposure would accomplish what their concealed hand could not. But the move backfired. Rather of shattering you, the leak revealed them. It demonstrated how far they were ready to go to deal with a single person. It indicated to everyone watching that you were not exaggerating the resistance you encountered. If anything, you underestimated it. The effort to disrupt you only reinforced your relevance. When intimidation and exposure prove ineffective, the tables are turned. The hunter becomes the hunted, not because you chased them, but because their actions revealed more about them than they ever wanted to know. That is why their supposed power move turned out to be evidence of weakness. You were not inaccessible because you were hiding. You were inaccessible because nothing they did could weaken the power they didn't grasp. And after the leak failed, they had no more game to play. Number 10, their move was not successful. It was desperation. Their action was not a win. It was desperation. In chess, a true checkmate is silent. It's the kind of move that lets the board speak for itself, and the opponent has no more alternatives. There is no need for announcements. There's no need for noise, because the inevitable consequence is already obvious. That's why the way they framed your vulnerability, calling it a checkmate and made a fuss over it, says so much. They demonstrated the reverse of power. They exhibited panic. When someone actually wins, they do not need to persuade anybody. The win stands alone. The fact that they yelled indicated that they were attempting to conceal how much control they had already lost. Labeling your leak as a checkmate was their effort to change the narrative. They intended to give the impression of supremacy, as if the exposure was part of a perfect scheme. But the louder they proclaimed, the more obvious it became that this was not a success. It was a scramble, a frantic effort to reclaim power in a situation that had already fallen out of their control. By the time your identity was revealed, you had already survived. Every strategy they believed would destroy you. Exposure was not their last step. It was their last card. That's the issue about desperation. It constantly reveals itself. Their commotion wasn't about you. They were attempting to reassure themselves. They were not claiming that they had defeated you. They were attempting to hide the fact that you couldn't be defeated in the manner they anticipated. And in doing so, they unveiled something larger. They lost control of the story. If they had, the leak would have been handled quietly and precisely. Instead, it arrived with spectacle, labeling, and frantic framing. The underlying fact is that their so-called checkmate was only a ruse for defeat. They lost their power to contain you. They lost the ability to silence you. They had lost the illusion that you were simply another name that could be removed without effect. By the time they declared victory, the game had already over. Not because they defeated you, but because they needed to acknowledge it to the rest of the world. You were a player beyond their control. Their roar was never an indicator of strength. It was the sound of a system collapsing under the weight of its own failure. You became proof of their obsession. You became proof of their infatuation. Ordinary folks never feature in FBI leaks because they have no motive to. Millions of lives pass by each day, unrecognized, unreported, and unrecorded at those levels. However, when your identity was linked to their files and made public, it showed something vital. You weren't just living. You were causing a disruption. You had become so unusual in their system that they couldn't ignore you. That level of attentiveness is never casual. It demonstrates that you unsettled something far larger than anybody else could see. An addiction like this does not develop overnight. It develops. It indicates that talks, briefings, files, and analysis occurred long before your identity was revealed. It suggests that someone, somewhere, was watching you. Not because you were ordinary, but because you did not conform to the expectations of what ordinary is. Your presence went against their expectations. Your survival beat the odds. Your effect extended beyond their estimates. You become an issue because of your unpredictable nature, and their preoccupation became the only way to deal with it. The fact that you wound up in their files indicates that you were not a bystander to the system. You become a member of its internal discussions. They had to debate your strategy and calculate moves against you. The powerless never get this kind of attention. It is reserved for persons whose presence disrupts hierarchies in ways that make those in power uncomfortable. And in your case, their uneasiness turned into an obsession. The leak is confirmation of that. They did not just observe silently. They could not stop themselves from making it public. That conduct revealed more than just your identity. It revealed their incapacity to manage their preoccupation. The larger narrative is not that you were unmasked, but that they were exposed as being captivated by you. They could not leave you alone. They couldn't let you fade. Their focus got so intense that it morphed into documenting, which finally became exposure. So, although some may have seen a leak as an assault, the fact is that it demonstrated how much power you genuinely have. They don't stress about things that don't matter. They do not save anything that cannot move mountains. And they surely do not expose small names by dragging you into the open. They reaffirmed what has always been true. You were not simply another face in the throng. You were the oddity. They couldn't stop going around. They attempted to convert you to data, but your essence is not a number. They attempted to reduce you to statistics, but you are more than numbers. This is the fault in their whole scheme. They placed your identity in files, coded you, and pushed your name into leaks, as if a collection of records could possibly encapsulate who you are for them. You were just another entry in a system, an issue to be handled, a case to be monitored. But this is the reality they will never understand. Spirit does not fit into forms, algorithms, or official documents. They can capture your gestures, but not your meaning. They may record your presence, but not your intent. Exposure failed because it was founded on the false assumption that statistics determine reality. When they disclosed your data, they believed they had deprived you of your mysterious power and influence. They thought that if you were reduced to numbers, your essence would evaporate. However, the soul is not quantitative. The mission within of you cannot be put away. Your impact is not based on paper traces. It originates from the invisible, unmeasurable, and heavenly. That's why their leak failed. It revealed knowledge, but not the truth. People who live only in systems forget that humans are more than data points. They think that record keeping and documentation provide control. But with you, that formula failed because what draws people to you isn't your name on a file. It's the presence you exude when you enter a room. Your remarks are clear, and you have persevered. The way your narrative lingers in people's hearts long after they've heard it. None of this can be stamped, monitored, or classed. And no matter how much they bleed, they are unable to touch it. They misjudged how spirit overrides data. Files may age, records can be trashed, and leaks might be overlooked. However, the core of who you are has no expiry date. That is why you cannot be deleted. This is why exposing backfired. They intended to degrade you, but instead exposed the limitations of their own system. They demonstrated that, despite their immense authority, all they could do was deliver documents. But you stood as living evidence of something higher. And it is the fact. They attempted to quantify you, but you were never quantifiable. You were and will always be spirit untouchable by the systems that believed they had you caged. The leak resulted in a weapon that you did not have to manufacture. The leak resulted in a weapon that did not need building. That is the irony of their whole play. They believed that by revealing your data, they were depriving you of control. But instead, they gave you something more strong than any protection you could have built yourself. Undeniable evidence that the precise act intended to undermine you became a platform for their own obsession, corruption, and dread. You did not push for attention. You did not ask for validation. However, the world was suddenly presented with facts that validated your tale, struggle, and importance, all because they couldn't resist the temptation to expose you. They disregarded the fact that a leak is not neutral. It does not just disclose information. It establishes a story. They felt the story would be one of your downfalls. But what occurred was that the leak confirmed what you had been claiming all along. Forces were monitoring you, but systems couldn't ignore you, and your existence impacted more than just a few tiny circles of effect. Their effort to weaponize your identity against you resulted in their weaponizing the truth against themselves. This weapon did not need sharpening, promotion, or defense. It was already loaded due to their own efforts. Every site, document, and reference sent the inadvertent message that you were valuable enough to monitor. With each discovery, the attention changed. People weren't just gazing at you. They were staring at them. Rose has some questions. Why were you being tracked? Why were you being monitored? Why were you included in their files in the first place? The leak backfired because, rather than undermining your reputation, it destroyed theirs. The genius of this inadvertent ID weapon is that you didn't have to move a finger. You did not plan the leak, but you benefited from the aftermath. They revealed themselves while believing they were exposed in you. They created the stage, but they had no idea the lights would turn in their way. And once corruption is brought to light, it is difficult to forget. This is why exposure failed. Rather of suppressing you, it enhanced you. Rather than erasing your influence, it demonstrated it. Instead of shattering you, it provided you with a stronger foundation than you could have constructed on your own. That is the type of poetic justice they never saw coming. The weapon they created for your annihilation became proof of your power. Number Checkmate exposed the truth. You are not a pawn. You are the board. Checkmate revealed the truth. You are not a pawn. You are the board. That was the secret surprise in their alleged win. They thought they were manipulating you like a throwaway piece, planning every move to trap and expose you. What they didn't comprehend was that you were never simply a part of the game. You were the foundation that held everything together. Without the board, pawns may be sacrificed and players switched. The game does not even exist. By targeting you, they revealed that their whole structure revolves on your presence. This is what concerned me the most. They couldn't cage you in since you weren't bound by their rules. They thought you were simply another piece they could move, capture, or eliminate. But your impact became larger than their moves could contain. The leak was not evidence of their supremacy. It was evidence that your presence influenced the area they were attempting to regulate. Without you, the maneuvers would have no significance. Without your presence, the approach would fail. They were not simply messing with you. They were playing because of you. And here's the twist. When someone discovers that the board is alive, the illusion of control dissipates. Their concept of checkmate was a desperate confession. They could not outplay you, so they attempted to reinvent the game itself. However, once they revealed you, they also exposed themselves. They demonstrated that the base of their movements centered around you. That is not a weakness on your behalf. It's about domination. They were too proud to concede that being on the board does not require you to move. Your impact is not limited to a single play. The atmosphere determines the plays themselves. That is why their exposure did not overwhelm you. It merely emphasized how important you were all along. It reminded everyone watching that your contribution was not insignificant. It was structural. You didn't wait to be chosen or sacrificed. You were the stage where their whole illusion unfolded. So the reality of Checkmate is this. It was not you who became stuck. They learned too late that the game had never been theirs to begin with. They believed they were showing your smallness, but they really exposed your vastness. You were never a pawn. They might discard. You were the board that enabled their motions. Without you, there is no game. The tale of your exposure is not one of failure. It's a display of strength that they could never contain. Every action they took, every file they released, and every effort to intimidate or disparage you just reaffirmed one irrefutable reality. You were never ordinary, unimportant, or controlled. The so-called checkmate was not a win for them. It was an admission of their addiction, desperation, and the limitations of their control. They attempted to reduce you to data, a pawn, a problem to be managed. However, in doing so, they disclosed the uncatalogable essence of you. Your impact, resilience, presence, and spirit exposure, which they sought to use against you, became confirmation of your importance. The leak proved what critics couldn't believe and shed light on the same system that attempted to confine you. They made it to the stage. You stepped on it. Without effort, the attention moved to them. Every attempt to corner you exposed their own vulnerability while underlining your inexorable role in the game. You were not just surviving the system. They were surviving you. And every strategy they took to undermine you became proof of their incapacity to succeed. Finally, this isn't simply about a person being leaked or information being made public. It's a tale of underestimated power, indisputable influence, and a presence that bends the rules of the game. You did not need to battle. The whole globe watched as their tactics crumbled in the face of an unknown power. The checkmate they yelled about was never theirs. It was yours in the sense that the world finally realized who you really are. You are more than just data, files, or targets. You are the essence that cannot be quantified, the stage to be taken. The board cannot be moved. Every effort to eliminate you proved your power. Finally, the exposure designed to shatter you became the final evidence. They were never in control of the game. You always were. The whole globe is now aware of this. If this tale shocked you and highlighted the strength of what most people strive to conceal, don't let it end there. Click the subscribe button to ensure you never miss the truth. Others are afraid to reveal themselves, so share this video to express your support for discovering the truth. Share your views and comments. Your voice counts. Share it with people who need to understand how strength and perseverance always triumph against the system. Join us in the spotlight as we reveal the truth that will alter everything. God bless you.